Welcome to Passing the Plate, the podcast that's all about food, traditions, and the incredible connections they create. I'm Ashley Covelli, the food writer and recipe developer behind Big Flavors from a Tiny Kitchen.
And I'm Lisa Lisson, the genealogist and family history expert behind Are You My Cousin? We are your guides on this flavor-packed adventure. We're not just talking about recipes. We're diving into family history, exploring new cultures, and preserving favorite recipes for future generations. In short, we're celebrating the stories and tastes that come with every bite.
So grab a seat at the table and let's head out on a journey of flavor, tradition, and connection. This is Passing the Plate, where every episode is a feast for the senses and a celebration of togetherness. Cinnamon is a pantry staple that can be used for more than just apple pie and snickerdoodle cookies. In today's episode, we'll learn more about the history and uses of this versatile spice. So Lisa, as our resident history expert, what can you tell us about the origins of cinnamon?
Well, cinnamon's a really interesting spice. It's probably interesting thing here for me is that it is one of the first spices I ever remember actually being able to recognize as a kid. And so that was a big thing. But cinnamon was actually it's native to Ceylon. I don't know if I said that pronounced that correctly, but we'll call it that. It's really what is today Sri Lanka. And tree cinnamon is actually made from the inner bark of a specific tree. And I can't even begin to say this Latin name, guys. But let's just go with it. The inner bark of the cinnamon tree is what I'm going to call it. But cinnamon, yeah, I can't even go there.
You want me to try?
Cinnamon, yeah, go for it.
Cinnamomum, like mom, cinnamomum, zeylenicum. Yeah. Yep. Follow us on Duolingo for more.
That with a cinnamon with a southern accent. Anyway, but cinnamon it actually dates back in Chinese writings all the way to 2800 BC, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
And really, until sometime in the early to mid 1800s, it was actually only grown in Ceylon. And then it was discovered that it could actually be grown elsewhere. And so today, we actually do see cinnamon being grown in South America, the West Indies, other tropical climates there. So but when you think about if you've got a spice that was that long and it's showing up in writings from 2800 BC all the way into the 1800s, that's a very long time that was the only place that it was actually grown. When you think about that, I was surprised. I just was surprised that it was still not being grown outside of Ceylon until the 1800s. A couple other interesting facts that I picked up on with it, which I thought was kind of interesting, that it is one of the first traded spices in the ancient world, and it was actually used as currency at one point. And I think we've seen that in some other things we've talked about on previous episodes, different spices.
And coffee, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Chocolate.
Exactly. Chocolate. Yes, yeah. My favorite. And I think we should bring back chocolate as currency.
A little chocolate with cinnamon and coffee in it, that would be delicious.
I'm sure I know I've had something like I've had chocolate with cinnamon, and I know I've had chocolate with coffee.
Yeah.
But somehow life always comes back to chocolate. For me, anyway. It has some medicinal purposes though too. So cinnamon, it wasn't just currency. It actually was used as for medicinal purposes, such to treat, say, coughing or hoarseness or sore throats. And and I've actually heard this next one. It was actually has been used to help with stomach aches or digestive troubles. And I've heard that in just because of my family history and reading, and I read a lot of history books and a lot of I actually do enjoy. I've read some of the old doctor's notes and things like that in records. And actually, cinnamon and other spices were certainly prevalent in medicine. And
Interesting.
The Egyptians, though, this one was a little different. They actually used the cinnamon for their embalming process.
Oh,
the ancient Egyptians. Yeah,
I wonder if that was to help with the aromas, maybe.
Well, I do think that could have been part of it, but it actually has a preservative effect to it. So cinnamon does have preservative qualities to it. And at some point in history has actually been used on meats to, preserve meats for longer periods of time. So yeah, so it's kind of an interest. It has a wide array of uses for this little spice of cinnamon that we tend to think of when we get a whiff of it, we're thinking Christmas and the pumpkin
Yeah.
spice lattes and those kinds of things, and yet it is such an I don't want to say ancient spice, but it is such an old spice that has been around for so many years, and part of culture and various cultures. Um, Now, one of the things I thought this was kind of a fun little aside too, that the cinnamon, that the Italians call it cannella. I don't know if I'm saying that right. You can
Sounds
correct me
right.
if I'm wrong. And what that means is little tube. And so when you think about the like cinnamon sticks, they look like little tubes,
Mhm.
and that's what they call it. I thought that was kind of cool.
And that kinda sounds like cannoli, the pastry deep fried pastry shell tubes that you fill with cream.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if the base word would be again the little tube,
Yeah,
perhaps.
probably. So I didn't actually realize how many varieties of cinnamon were available until the first time I went to a Penzeys spice shop. Um, there's a lot of spice shops where you can do this, but that was the one that I first kind of walked around and they had all the little jars and you could go smell the different types and just seeing that there were different varieties because I always, just go to the store, you buy cinnamon. I mean, I know you could get sticks or ground, but there's actually cinnamons from different parts of the world and they have different properties. So if we head over to their website, um, they've got their regular, if you want to call it, cinnamon is mixed from several different ones. It's not just one variety of cinnamon. So it's got Chinese, Vietnamese. Here we go with another pronunciation. Korintje, Corinth cinnamon, and then Ceylon cinnamon. So if you want kind of the most well-rounded one from them, that's the one that you can get. But if you look into I remember the Vietnamese cinnamon, I thought was, when I sniffed that jar, it was mind blowing how different and like spicy it smelled. Their description says that Vietnamese cinnamon is the strongest, richest, and sweetest cinnamon around. For traditional cinnamon recipes like gooey cinnamon rolls, the vibrant flavor of Vietnamese cinnamon really shines. It's so strong that in most recipes it should be cut back by about a third, but it's perfect used full strength in any recipe where cinnamon is the main delicious flavor. So I thought that was really interesting.
That is interesting. I've heard of Vietnamese cinnamon, but I've never had it, so I'm not that familiar
Mm.
with it. But that is interesting that they recommend that you actually cut it back.
And
I
I
wonder if
didn't
that's
know
for
that. Yeah.
I wonder if that's for like, especially for people say like myself, who are not used to it.
Mhm.
Kind of otherwise, I could see where that might be overpowering.
Yeah, but it makes sense for something like a cinnamon roll that where you want that in your face cinnamon flavor that it would be warranted to use there.
Uh,
Um,
yes.
their Ceylon cinnamon says complex and fragrant with a citrus overtone and a rich buff color. Although Ceylon cinnamon is less strong, its hint of citrusy flavor and lack of any bite whatsoever makes it the favorite in both England and Mexico, where it's preferred for all uses. And that one, it's from Sri Lanka.
That's more the original one,
Hmm.
if I'm correct.
And then the one that I had a hard time pronouncing, the Korintje Indonesia cinnamon, it says sweet and mellow. That cinnamon is the type of cinnamon we remember from our childhood. Fragrant, Corinth. I have no idea how to even begin pronouncing that. So this cinnamon is as strong as Chinese cinnamon, but smoother. We love the cinnamon for sprinkling on hot cereal, oatmeal, and cream of wheat. French toast, pancakes, and waffles, sugar cookies, and pie crusts. Perfect for cinnamon breads, quick yeast, or toasted with raisins. So that's the ones there. And then I always love going over to Burlap and Barrel's website also because they have so many interesting spices. And they always have different varieties, like things I've never heard of, like in our salt and pepper episode, they talked about purple peppercorns, which I hadn't even heard of. So they have, if you kind of want a little sampling of cinnamons, they have a collection that's got three different items. It's got royal cinnamon, cinnamon verum, Verum, that's from Tanzania, and then cinnamon quills. So I'm like, what are some of these things even? So cinnamon quills, it says our hand-rolled cinnamon quills are beautifully fragrant and made just for us from young cinnamon verum bark, aka Ceylon cinnamon or quote true cinnamon, by our partners in Sri Lanka. They have an enticing warm flavor that blooms when heated, and you can use a whole quill in place of a standard cinnamon stick. These quills are perfect for hot beverages, porridge, rice pudding, and savory dishes like braises and stews. Their skinny shape is a mark of incredible skill. Each one is hand rolled and custom cut to fit in this jar. So I guess quill is kind of like a stick. What it looks like, it's that like double rolled in, kind of like a little scroll. So those are
That's
the
what I was picturing when
mm-hmm.
when you were telling us about it. It sounds wonderful. I would love to try it.
Yeah, their royal cinnamon is the Vietnamese ones, and they're if you want to head to the website, we'll leave a link, but you can see it gives you like a whole rundown of the history of it, originally called Saigon cinnamon, and it just like it's really interesting. They tell you the farms they come from. The one thing that I thought was very interesting, I have never heard of this before. And I mean, I've heard of a lot of kind of culinary things. Never heard of this. And I see now, today it says sold out. It wasn't sold out when I was looking this up the other day. Cinnamon tree leaves. Did you even know this was a thing?
No, I've never heard of
Okay. I mean,
this.
like I think both of us prior to today knew that cinnamon sticks came from the bark of a tree, but
Right.
it didn't ever occur to me that there's obviously leaves on this tree and that you could use them to eat. So, this says our cinnamon tree leaves contain the delicate essence of cinnamon and are a slightly sweeter, more interesting alternative to traditional bay laurel leaves. They also make a beautiful cinnamon tea. Just infuse a few leaves in a teapot with hot water. The leaves are a byproduct of our cinnamon verum, where the leaves are collected from branches being harvested for bark. By harvesting the leaves, our partner farmers are able to make more money from their cinnamon trees. Cinnamon leaves are a traditional ingredient in rice dishes and stews where they add a complex herbal flavor and cinnamon perfume. And they have like a highlighted review from somebody who said, I've been a foodie for many years and used to work in the food industry and write about food, and I have to say that these cinnamon tree leaves are one of the best finds I've ever come across. So I'm like so interested in this now. Of
So how
course.
so so I can't wait to hear when you have actually tried these,
Yeah.
Ashley.
Yeah,
'Cause
I
I know.
know. Um, But yeah, it's great because they each of the pages on this site, it's you can really dig in and learn a lot about the ingredients. It gives tasting notes, like on this for these leaves, it says molasses, oak, and raw honey. It tells you other spices it pairs well with. It tells you the process. So these are sun dried. It gives you some cooking tips. It's just like really a good way to nerd out over getting to know an ingredient like on a deeper level. So, if you have a spice shop locally where you can go in and they have jars where you can sniff, even just doing that can kind of give you a different appreciation of it, I feel like.
Oh, it sounds like a wonderful experience. Now I'm gonna be on the lookout for spice shops
Yeah. Well,
because I would love to go and kind of have that opportunity to smell and taste, the different
mhm.
types of cinnamon that you were talking about. Wish you could cook delicious food but feel like you never have the time, money, or energy? At Big Flavors from a Tiny Kitchen, Ashley gets it. She believes that anyone can create amazing meals regardless of their experience, budget, or kitchen size. Her approach breaks down the barriers that many of us have to cooking and inspires confidence in the kitchen. Ashley puts her decade plus of culinary experience into creating realistic recipes with flexible options that will actually work in your home kitchen. Whether you're a seasoned pro looking for new inspiration, a new cook just getting your bearings, or a busy mom who needs family favorite meals fast, Big Flavors is in your corner to help you create meals and memories. Visit BigFlavorsTinyKitchen.com today to find new and inspiring recipes that will help you make the most of mealtime. But let's shift gears for a second. I want to ask you a question. So, when I grew up, I typically think of cinnamon being used in, say, sweet dishes like a
Mhm.
dessert or, your cinnamon rolls or apple pie kind of thing. But I do know that people use cinnamon a lot in savory dishes.
Mhm.
So, can you enlighten me or our audience so much, or for that matter, on that particular type of way of using cinnamon?
Yeah, I think cinnamon is a really interesting uh, ingredient to include in savory dishes. Keep in mind that a little goes a long way. So, like, um, for example, I put a little bit in my chili that I make. Not a lot because it'll overpower it, but just gives it a little, I don't know, the depth that it gives it is really interesting. I am curious now with these cinnamon leaves, now that I know that's a thing, to use those in place of a bay leaf in something. Um, but so it's used in Persian, Greek, Armenian, Lebanese, Mexican, Moroccan. I think in Indian cuisine sometimes you fry the sticks in oil to kind of perfume the oil and infuse the oil with that flavor. Um, in trying to think of some of the recipes that I've made that include cinnamon. I put it in kebab. I make a Persian meatloaf that I put a little of that in. I believe it's in a lot of Mexican mole. Didn't you make mole when you were on a trip to Mexico? I think you were telling
Yeah,
me.
just you're absolutely
Do you
right. My
remember if
husband
I
and I
used
took
cinnamon?
a we did use cinnamon now that you think about that. When I think Malay, I was like chocolate, because that's
Mm-hmm.
where I focus. But you're absolutely right. They did use cinnamon. And it almost makes me wonder, is cinnamon actually, at least through history and even now, is it actually used more in savory dishes as opposed to a sweet dish when you think of it in global terms?
Right. Yeah. I know, I feel like it's really, nice with, like, braised meat, like a lamb shank or something would be really nice. And then, kind of not necessarily sweet or savory, because when I think of sweet with cinnamon, I think of, like, baked goods usually or, you know, snickerdoodles, apple pie, crumbles, crisps, stuff like that. But don't forget about drinks. There's really great ways you can use cinnamon in beverages aside from like mulled wine or mulled cider. You could it's seen a lot in horchata, Mexican cuisine. It's like a rice milk beverage. There's a place near where I live that they garnish the top with cinnamon, but there's also, I think they might use cinnamon in like steeping it in with the milk also, but they put cardamom too. So it's a really nice pairing. And I do know some people put a little cinnamon in with their coffee before they brew it.
I've absolutely heard people doing that. Some of the coffee shops, you'll have some of the um, they'll have a specialty coffee, whether, an iced coffee or a mocha type thing that will have
Hmm.
cinnamon on it as well. I actually tried putting cinnamon in when I would make
Hmm.
coffee at home. I can't say it was my favorite flavor
Right.
profile, but I didn't dislike it either. But you're right. It just kind of gave a different feel to it.
A little
Um,
something.
yeah, yeah, a little different depth to it. So I do have to ask, so my husband was traveling and he brought back some cinnamon from Egypt. And it's quite a large amount, but it was still so we've shared it around, and I use cinnamon a lot, but how long does it last? Like when you get a spice like that, do I need to really worry about it going bad after, a year or so, or
Did he bring cinnamon sticks?
oh, no, it was ground cinnamon. It smells wonderful. I don't know, like in the scheme of what you were sharing earlier, what type per se of cinnamon it is, but I will say more, it smells more cinnamony, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I mean, it's
Yeah,
just definitely a more than like when I would open up my little container I get from the grocery store.
right.
It's
Have
a
you ever
wonderful smell.
sniffed them kind of one after the other to kind of
Not,
compare?
funny is I haven't done that.
Yeah. Might wanna try
But
that.
you're the you're the recipe developer from this story.
Um, yeah, but we in past episodes, like our Super Tasters episode and several of them, you have a good, what I call you, a spice sommelier. Like you have a good way of describing the flavors, I feel like.
Thank you.
So as far as, when do they go bad? It depends. Officially, a lot of advice, like, you go on like the McCormick Spice website or something, says that they last about 1 to 2 years. But in general, I'd say a whole spice is going to last longer than one that's pre-ground. Um, you can grind your own spices. Grinding cinnamon is a little tricky because you can use like a coffee grinder for that. I recommend if you're gonna grind your own spices, have a separate kind of cheapy little coffee grinder that you use just for that, so you don't end up brewing coffee that tastes like cumin or whatever. Um, but
Would not be good.
yeah, I I would I honestly don't really keep track with my spices. I don't I use a lot of spices, but I don't know that I necessarily go through an entire container in a year or two. But if you start to notice like a dish that you make, like the flavor's not quite as strong as it used to be or something, you might want to, you notice the potency's not quite there. You might want to swap it out for a new batch. Or I used to I'd make like a lot of Indian food, and that needs a lot of different spices. So I would buy these big bags of spices from Penzeys and I'd refill my little jars. But if you're not going through them as fast, it's actually makes more sense to buy a smaller quantity than a big one. So
That makes sense. I mean, and that's kind of what I've noticed with spices. As you've said, it's not a sense of being good or bad, but maybe they're just not as strong
right.
every time.
And I will say though, also make sure you're storing them if you can away from heat and light. So don't store them right next to your stove. Don't store them right next to a window. If you're able to, that'll help preserve them for a little longer also.
That's a good piece of advice.
Mm.
Definitely. Good to hear that. All right. You can find the recipe and resource links that we discussed in today's episode at passingtheplate.org/55. Well, that's a wrap on this episode of Passing the Plate. We hope you enjoyed our journey into the world of food, traditions, and the amazing connections they create.
As always, it's been a pleasure sharing these delicious stories with you. Remember, food is more than just sustenance. It's a way to connect the dots between our past, present, and future.
And until next time, happy eating, happy connecting, and pass the plate. Head to passingtheplate.org/podcast for show notes.